Can anyone tell me what this is?
It's a whip bell.
It's a bell, but where did I get this bell? Innsbruck, at the bell factory. So I like to use this as opposed to a baby crying, but I just carry this with my bro. So I'd like you to let's start out with a little bit of a warm-up activity in your groups. I'd like you to discuss what assignments, activities, or topic in your language testing class was the most effective in helping students understand complex concepts like reliability, validity, or fairness. Why do you think it worked? How did the course you taught or took strike a balance between theory and practice? Were there any areas where this balance could have been improved? What challenges did students face in your course or you face as a student? How are those challenges addressed? Through course design, assessments, or instructional strategies. I'm going to give you about maybe 5 minutes to discuss. I'm going to walk around and listen, do some formative assessment as I overhear what people are talking about, and then we'll come back and I may call on people to report what their table was talking about to keep you on task. I'm looking at you, Meg, both of you. All right? So go ahead and get started thinking about what was some of the things that were most helpful for you. So discuss in your small groups, and if you are by yourself and want to get into a larger group, go ahead and move so that you can discuss.
Well, I'll say I took science which was like we didn't really talk about validity or reliability, but we talked about a lot of other things. If you don't know a lot of the very famous scholar in our field. So it was like a very different introduction. And I'm really glad that I got it. But I was also working for Meg, so thinking about validity on my own.
I have three major assignments. First is they write a test. Second is they write an application on issue. That's the investigation, and then they develop the data. And they put it together into a test application. So I don't think any of them are better than the idea that by the time they do it a couple times, they have a good sense of reliability. I call it big stuff. Reliability, validity.
No, I don't want to tell.
Oh, no, they gave us
Some of them take it seriously, really well. That kind of discussion is important.
I would like that.
Some round three.
What's the student have, but I guess.
Most of these workers, first year,
Yeah. And then what they will also very
not all theory, but explain it. Some companies looks like.
Good years.
So one of those
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's come back together. So, let's see. I'm just going to cold call on some people. So, Ahmed, tell us something that you guys talked about at your table.
I didn't, but I got some notes.
No, I'm asking you to summarize what people talked about, not your comments. So,
Okay. So, as much as I remember, so Gary talked about it, so about the technique they have been using basically for their students to understand, to put them in the test taker role and have them take different tests and reflect on that. So, for example, multiple choice, right? Self-evaluation, and then short answer, so that they actually relate those to their real life experiences. If some of them are not teachers and do not have teaching experience, they at least have a test taking experience in their life. So going back to them and relating to that, and then reflect back on those experiences in the class. And of course, before doing that, they require them to read certain chapters and then do that exercise with them.
that's great. I mean, I think it is a very interesting experience to be the consumer of the test. Like when we're doing OPI trainings at BYU, I always offer to let the participants that are our teachers to go and take an OPI first, so that they understand what it's like, so they see it through the consumer end first, and then they can start. In essence, you lift up the hood of the engine and let them sort of see what's going underside, what's happening underneath. Because then I think they can understand the design behind it a little bit more. But it's nice to know what it's like as a user first. Let's see, over this table here, my friend from Cal. You're both of my friends, so you guys can decide.
Okay, there we go. So we had Leah and Sam, yes, we're talking about some of the techniques they had used previously, and that's using a combination of like introducing the theory of validity and reliability and fairness, and then having either like real life open source data sets for students to look at and kind of see if they can parse out those different concepts, and then also looking at the design of different assessments and seeing, identifying those and kind of talking about whether or not they think they're at good levels, just at that very novice level.
Yeah, I actually really love giving our students data and letting them actually do something with data. Whether it's, and that's one of the things, like I save data from past tests all the time, that just so that it gives them something to actually start. Like, how do you answer the question? You know what you're assuming, but does the data actually confirm, or is it surprising and you actually learn a lot more when it doesn't confirm what you thought you know? Rory, do you want to tell us what you guys talked about at your table?
We talked a lot about the things that we try to make work well. So different activities.
There's a microphone for you.
Different activities for introducing the concepts like reliability, validity, and fairness, but also the challenge of introducing those and kind of, I don't know, if I had to summarize, we all have pretty different experiences both teaching and taking classes, and whether all three of those get brought up equally or at all in the classroom.
Thanks. My friend from Cal State Fullerton, wearing the hat. I'm making the volunteers work a lot. They realized that this was going to be a run back and forth.
Well, one thing that was really interesting with the striking a balance between theory and practice, and I'm still a student, is where I was taking a class where we had service learning, and it had to do with studying about creating an inner language where students had to create their own language to learn the L2 that's unique to them. And while I was in the classroom, I noticed that one of the students, and several of the students were doing this as well, they were translating the English into their L1 language to make sense of it. One student was actually taking it from English into Chinese, and it was awesome. And I was like, wow, what are you doing? He's like, well, this is my explanation of this. This is for me to understand what's going on. And I thought that was great, you know, and they were also doing it in Spanish and stuff like that. So also what they were talking about in the University of Chicago, which with the Spanish students, I thought was really interesting too, because it's something like that, where these students, where they're creating the L2, have to utilize their L1, and they create their own unique, individualized language. There's another term for that, I forget. But yeah, that's what I remember from theory and practice.
Great.
You want to add something?
So I'm just a PhD student, but I attended Dr. Oki class in language assessment, and one of the most effective ways that he helped us to understand this concept is to telling stories. So yeah.
There is something about the power of narrative. So one last table. Volunteer, should I pick on someone?
None of us teach assessment, but have taken some classes and just talked about how practice is really what makes things stick. So balancing the theory and the practice, but really giving them the hands-on, like you said, giving them data sets to work with. That's what stuff like that has really helped us, and providing very practical examples to support the theory.
Thanks. So, to Gary's thing, there is some power of narrative, so I'm going to tell you a story. So, I'm teaching 660, which is our Introduction to Language Testing course, and I have a student who just doesn't like me. And people like me. I don't know what's wrong. And so I'm talking with him, and he finds the assignments to be busy work, and he doesn't like working with in his group because they're just dumb, is basically what he's saying. You know, he's like, they don't know how to do this stuff, and I'm talking about it. I said, well, and he's like, what do I need to do to get an A? And all he wanted to do, he was nitpicking about getting this grade. And so I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep because people like me, and when people don't like me, I just can't sleep. And I write an open letter to my students, a note about my grading philosophy. Consider the two possible letters of recommendation I might write. Dear prospective employer or graduate program, I deliberately design my classes so there is abundant flexibility for the students to engage in learning activities that are helpful to them, while at the same time develop skills needed in academia and industry. Among those skills, I place a heavy emphasis on self-directed learning, critical thinking, vis-a-vis interpretation of data, numeracy, written and spoken communication. And I went on. So, I wake up the next day and tons of people are responding, and I had an actual range from novice, like well stated, fantastic, yes, we've got the nerd word level, we've got intermediate text type, a message for us all about how to live life. Then I've been a few advanced, like with one of my friends who's a German teacher talking about this. And it made me start thinking a lot about what my philosophy is for grading, what my philosophy is for my syllabus. And I'll share the letter with you at the end, with the rest of it. But the question is, what has kept you up at night on the way grades are treated by your students? Is there a particular student? Is there a particular situation? Go ahead and discuss at your table. About 30 more seconds. All right, let's come back together. Is there I'm not going to cold call people this time, but do you have something at your table that you thought was particularly interesting that you should share with the whole group? If so, raise your hand. We have the striped shirt here.
Sorry, I already talked, but Luba made a point about fairness and like what is fair. You know, does it mean that we have to treat everybody like exactly the same way and give out scores exactly the same way? Or is it fair to consider people's circumstances and whether or not they've like really met the objectives, even if it's, you know, you're not following every single rule to the letter?
Yeah. A lot of it is like, what do grades actually measure? What are they supposed to measure? Is it compliance? Is it skill acquisition? You know, is it, you know, it can be a little muddy depending on what grades are actually there to measure. Other thoughts or comments?
So I just want to share that the grades I give to students, they don't keep me up at night. But when students fail a proficiency test, because I manage the Chinese flagship program, so that's kind of lifelong. I mean, it can affect. So it's a high risk decision. Sometimes I challenge the test that they took. It didn't really reflect what the students was able to do. So that really keep me just wake up. Like, what are we going to do with this student?
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's a really good point. Well, I'm gonna, so this is sort of what I was having you discuss. So after this experience that I had, I started doing a deep dive into the literature on grading and some of the stuff that we do with grading, and this was not on the, so I'm just gonna share some of the stuff, a highlight of some of the things that I've learned and that have helped me create my syllabus, and then I'll show you my syllabus, and then we'll see who else has shared syllabi by that time. So, one of the things to think about is, are grading there, like what is the purpose of the grade? And what they've found is that sometimes grades are actually used to force compliance. They're sort of used as behavior things. Show up, it's not necessarily skill acquisition. It doesn't, it could be citizenship. Sometimes they measure effort, but the idea is to decide what is the grade actually measuring. And when we're training language teachers, and this is the thing that I've thought a lot about, is that I determined that as a teacher for a long time when I first started teaching, I was doing the exact opposite of what I wanted my students to do when they were teaching language. I would be lecturing instead of doing group work. So that's made me rethink how I do my content classes. If I want students to be talking together in the language classroom, then in my content class on how to be a language teacher, I should model how do I get people to talk. So I put things up and I walk around and I listen, and then I can hear if there are, I can first make sure they're on task, but I can listen to see if there are any, I can do formative assessment. I'm actually testing them, but it's in a very low stakes way. People don't realize they're being assessed. It's scenario-based assessment, but the scenario is you're in my class and I'm talking and I'm just listening to you, and I can provide feedback to say, all right, everyone, just a reminder, in English we have years, we aren't our years. So in English we are years, so it's like I am 55 years old, not I have, okay? Go back to your discussion talking about people, right? So I can provide feedback and provide corrective feedback without signaling anyone out. So let's talk a little bit about the history of grading. In the late 18th, early 19th century, it was informal assessments. Early US skills used narrative descriptions of student progress. Teacher feedback focus was on qualitative feedback rather than numerical or letter grades. And we have to remember also at this time, the only people that were in school, this is from a US perspective, they were rich. They were the families that could afford to have their children go to school. So this was not every child. This was the child of the people that had privilege that could actually go to school. So assessment focused on personal growth. There was no standardized grading system. In the 1830s, we get the introduction of percentile grading. Horace Mann's influence advocated a more uniform system to make student progress measurable. Percentages were introduced, used to quantify student performance and create a comparative scale. Think percentile on a scale of 1 to 100, like 100%. There's a focus on precision led to questions of fairness and subjectivity in marking. And when I was doing the second language teaching assessment day, someone was taking notes and they made a poster that says, the minute we assign a number to something, we think we can do math with it. Because what happens is that we start giving grades with numbers, and then it's like, well, you're an 89 and you're an 87, so you definitely are way better than the 87. We give ourselves an idea that we have a level of precision that we can't really do without a lot of work. In the 1890s, the emergence of letter grades, Harvard University's innovation, A to F to simplify reporting. So instead of having a 100-point scale, we have a 6-point. Letter grades quickly spread to other institutions. It simplified assessment but introduced ranking, which shaped academic competition. So then we have the standardization in the early 20th century. Compulsory education. Now, instead of just educating the rich, we're going to educate everyone. The rise of public schools and compulsory attendance drove grading standardization. The A to F system was widely adopted across US K-12 schools and colleges by the 1930s. And the effect on learning, it shifted a focus from learning to achievement and compliance with grading norms. In the 1920s and 1940s, we get the rise of the IQ and standardized tests, the bubble sheets that we all have a lot of fun with doing our reliability statistics. We have IQ testing, the expansion of standardized tests. Objective measures, schools increasingly relied on exams to produce objective scores. The consequences, there's increased focus on rankings, competition, and potential bias in grading. Post-World War II, we have the behaviorist influence. Grades can be seen as an incentive for academic performance. B.F. Skinner's impact reinforced grading as a tool for behavior modification. The result reinforced a focus on extrinsic motivation with grades as primary motivators. Then in the 60s and 70s, we start to see critique of this. There's growing dissatisfaction with the pressure of grades and their impact on student well-being. Alternative models are offered. Pass-fail with narrative evaluations, experimented with in progressive schools. But what started happening is students with these narratives would be applying to universities, and the universities were like, we don't want to deal with this. This is a lot of work for us to read a narrative. Just tell us, what grade did they get? So there's sort of this backlash against it. So traditional grading remained dominant. So this is my favorite Arrested Development clip.
Blue was talking to his son about his latest test. A minus, huh? Very good. Minus. I'm gonna go ahead and post it here. Get up there.
C minus. C-N-I-N-E-S.
Did you even study? No, I didn't. Wow, how impressive is that?
Well, the bar for the refrigerator has been lowered, huh?
Oh, grades are meaningless. Maybe last school didn't even have them.
Back in Boston, Mavy's parents had enrolled her in a progressive school with its own system of evaluation.
All I'm saying, Lindsay, is that you might want to push her a little bit because a kid without discipline can get into some pretty tough stuff.
So you think she's gonna suddenly turn to drugs because she got C+?
Minus. And yes, I think that without boundaries, a kid can get into trouble. And yes, sometimes that could mean drugs.
Well, I think stress is what leads to trouble. You know the kind you put on George Michael even when he gets an A?
Minus. And yeah, it's an ice cream.
So, A Nation at Risk comes out, a report called for accountability, reinforcing the importance of grades and measuring outcomes, standardized testing boom. When I was doing my doctorate in sort of the educational measurement side of things, my professor said it was not no child left behind, it was no psychometrician left behind. Impact on grading, increased pressure on schools to produce high grades, linking them to school funding and performance. So, one more story, and then we'll get into the syllabi. So, it's World War I, we start seeing aviation in our armed forces. This is the first time we started having, Snoopy in the dogfight planes, whatever. And then technology improves, and they are actually using jet engines, and they see a huge rise in the increase of accidents in airplanes. And so when that happens, there are a few things that could be the problem. One could be pilot error, another could be equipment failure, but the pilots were doing fine with the previous airplanes. One could be training, so they were trying to figure out what exactly was going on. So, the way they had designed those original cockpits is they had taken the measurements of 4,063 pilots and had designed the seat height, the distance to the, like, everything based on the average man. And it was the average man, there were no women pilots then. And one of the people that was working on this said, well, wait a second, how many of these 4,063 pilots are actually average when we look at all 10 dimensions? And what he found was that 0 matched all 10 dimensions. So when you design a pilot, when you design a cockpit for the average pilot, you're designing it for no one. Because of that, the Air Force said, you've got to solve this, you've got to come up with an alternative. They said, no, it's going to be way too expensive. But they're like, well, if you want the money, you'll figure out a way to do it. And so they figured out a way to do it. Instead of designing for the average, they designed for the edges. And what they used in aviation, we came to driving, where we had adjustable seats, we have steering wheels that go up and down, you can have headrests, you can have armrests that adjust, so that instead of designing for the average, you're designing for the edges. Well, in Todd Rose's books, The End of Average, he argues that traditional school is often structured for the average student. Means that we're designing our courses, they come in, 14 weeks later we spit them out, they're in a factory, they acquire this much knowledge in 14 weeks, off they go, voila, we now have our cog that, we now have our widget that can administer language tests. And the question is, are we designing for the average or are we designing for the edges? Are we allowing some flexibility in how we structure our things so that we can capitalize on the strengths of our students and help them shore up their weaknesses? Adam Grant, in his book Think Again, states, made this observation. He did it, this is when he's at the Wharton School, so he had highly successful students, and he had a project that was a little bit unorthodox, and he said, the students who struggled the most were the straight A students, the perfectionists. It turns out that although perfectionists are more likely than their peers to ace school, they don't perform any better than their colleagues at work. Grades are not a strong predictor of job performance. Achieving excellence in school often requires mastering old ways of thinking. Building an influential career demands new ways of thinking. In a classic study of highly accomplished architects, the most creative ones graduated with a B average. Their straight A counterparts were so determined to be right that they often failed to take the risk of rethinking the orthodoxy. A very similar pattern emerged in the study of students who graduated at the top of their class. Valedictorians aren't likely to be the future's visionaries, education researcher Karen Arnold explains. They typically settle into a system instead of shaking it up. So, modern grading reforms, the growth mindset movement shifting towards fostering excellence and growth over fixed outcomes, competency-based education, emphasis mastery of skills over numerical grades. Current trends are specifications grading, ungrading, self-assessment, formative feedback, growth-oriented grading are gaining traction. So I'm going to tell you one more story. This winter, I got a season pass to go skiing at Sundance. It's 20 minutes from my house. I skied in the morning and then I would teach my testing class in the afternoon. And I learned something this year. Slow signs won't necessarily slow you down. Skiing reminds me of the language proficiency. Just like the baby hill and greens align with novice criteria, black diamonds, double black, or backcountry align with superior. The less groomed a trail is, the more it aligns with those higher proficiency levels of skiing. I'd self-assess as an intermediate mid. I do well on groomed slopes, even steep ones, but the only way to progress to the next level is to start tackling some advanced runs. Should I take the plunge with the black diamond or stick with something more familiar? So I go to Bishop's Bowl. When I got off the lift, I skied over to check the map. I decided to send it. This is what I texted to my kids. That's, for those that are older, sending it means to go for it, okay? I successfully skied Bishop's Bowl. What I didn't do was to check what run to take after Bishop's Bowl. I assumed it led all the way to the flathead lift, but instead I found myself staring at an array of black diamond options with no clue of how technical they were. Tombstone sounded a little ominous, but when I looked down Badlands, I could at least see the bottom of the run with Jake's lift in the background. I inched my way across the moguls until I reached the steep but smooth section. I started skiing again. What happened next is a bit of a blur. I just know that suddenly I was sliding headfirst down the mountain, unable to get my skis around in time. And I was heading straight for the slow sign. As I tumbled, I thought about those lessons on choice and accountability. You can't always choose your consequences after you've made the choice. Maybe you should have paid better attention to the map. At least I hope I provided some quality entertainment for the skiers coming down bare-clad, those riding in the chairlift up. One woman even stopped to check to see if I was okay as I trudged up the mountain to retrieve the skis I left behind. What grade would you give me on my skiing performance? Do we grade? Would we would we grade people that are willing to take risks? Do we give them credit for that, or are we trying to incentivize people to play it safe?
Well, if we're using the OPI paradigm, did you sustain the intermediate level before you had to break down?
I did, yes. So, I guess, does your current approach encourage the development of the features required to improve proficiency? Does it encourage behaviors we wish to encourage, such as risk-taking? Is your grading system more of a punitive system or a reward system? Do you have assignments that are low risk but important because they lead to growth? How can we individualize at least some grading to reward growth? So this is what this is how I've changed my syllabus. I start out I give my students my teaching philosophy. So here's the letter Let's see. I have many little assignments throughout the semester that are designed to be low stakes and allow students flexibility in learning on their own. I also have a major project that we do in class that is designed for students to showcase their skills and the knowledge they are learning. It is often a group project. I want them to develop skills in collaborating with others and apply their emerging skills to real-world situations via experiential learning. The only thing I request of students is that for every course credit, 2 for undergrad or 3 for graduate students, of their best work outside of class. So a graduate student would be expected to dedicate 9 hours per week in addition to the 3 hours we meet together for a 3 credit hour class for a total of 12 hours a week. An undergraduate would be less. I believe the only way to improve is through dedicated time on task and deliberate practice. And my experience has been that I've never had a student who actually put the time in not learn. It's typically people that don't put the time in. So my experience with insert the name was that they actively wanted to learn and were eager to apply the principles not only in class but in other areas as well. They looked for ways to incorporate the principles we read and studied about, worked well with others in group, and showed evidence of both mastering the material and the requisite skills. While not perfect, there was constant improvement. In fact, they went above and beyond my expectations and surprised me with fill in the blank, because I'd never considered it from that perspective before. Please ask them to share their class project with you so you can see evidence of the work they can produce to see if it meets your standards. My experience with insert name, this is option 2. My experience with insert name was that they searched for the minimum that could be done to get the job done. I'm not certain if they cared whether they truly learned about what the class covered, but were more worried about grades than substantive learning. Rather than engaging with the material, they complained of it as busy work. They rarely, if ever, mentioned what they had read in class or incorporated it in other ways. Every time I gave an assignment, they wanted me to hold their hand so they could get an A by expending the least amount of effort needed. They were not interested in learning for the joy of self-improvement, but rather wanted a sticker that would stoke their ego that they are okay just as they are, thank you very much. And what do I need to do for that A? They didn't tolerate ambiguity very well and wanted checklists of what needed to be completed. Please ask them to share their project with you so you can see evidence of the work they can produce to see if it meets your standards. To my students, if you have questions about how to make a project or assignment beneficial, a beneficial part of a professional portfolio and how to use it to improve your learning. I am anxious to help you. If you want to nitpick and see what the minimum is you can get done to get an A, I think you've missed the point of my teaching philosophy. I don't expect perfection. I expect effort, sustained effort. I expect a sincere desire to improve and learn. I expect evidence of skill development. So please ask away on how you can use this as an opportunity to learn and improve. If you can honestly say that it's taking you more than the number of hours outside of class to do all the work, and you need to modify some of the assignments, please talk with me. Let's see how we can make the course get through you instead of you getting through the course. So that's how I've changed. Now I just have the students tell me the grade they think they deserve. They still have all the assignments, and we have an exit interview, and I'm like, okay, tell me why you think you deserve this. Did you spend 12 hours a week for the whole semester? If not, like, you're missing all these assignments. Was something going on? And so that's how I've actually changed my class, and I've never had a student who's actually put in all the time not get an A. So for me, it's sort of taken away some of the stress about trying to nitpick over the grading. So let's go take a look to see what other people have shared. So in my folder here, I'll show you what I have. One of the things that I do is I give my students a list of can-do statements. So this is a list of, I give them to them before they come to class. This is the very first thing that they do is, I ask them to rate themselves on a 5-point scale, 1 being that I have no idea what you're talking about, 5 being I can teach this myself. I have the ACTFL ILR scale, types of tests, items, forms, rating performance assessments, designing test language skills, Excel, measures of central tendency. Nathan, a lot of these come straight from the chapters of your book. So I just have them go through and I say, listen, the very first day of class, I say, if you had a 1 before where you wouldn't even know to start, you can put a 2. Look at your textbook. You guys are adults. I may not have time to cover everything in class, but make sure that you can do the can-do statements here. Then the other thing that I've done with my class is I have it so that we meet once a week where I do a sort of a lecture on Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays, they're broken up into small groups and they do things on their own. They do group work, and they're in different locations, and I just poke my head in and I listen to them work on group. Because I think part of it, my experience as a pracademic with Meg says we're pracademics, you're like, when I'm actually in a test development team, I'm never by myself. It's always part of a group, and we're working together. And so I'll have them just do stuff together, and then I act as the boss, and we'll come in and listen to them, and then provide some feedback, and then we, listen to see what's happening, then meet people when they come back. All right. Nathan, do you want to share what your syllabus is?
Sure, I had the microphone. I do the 2 chapters for my book every week pretty much, not counting necessarily the first week. Is this the 560? Yeah, 560 is the graduate one. 499 is actually 408, long story. That's the undergrad. For the graduate one, use my book, and it's 1 chapter a week pretty much of the first 10 chapters about test development, and 1 chapter a week on the stats. By the way, anyone who's still using the book, obviously Flash doesn't work anymore, but the tutorials have been re-rendered, and I put them on YouTube. They're not password protected, but they're not searchable. Send me an email, I'll get you the link for the playlist. It's there. By the way, I am trying to work on a 2nd edition this fall during my sabbatical. Fingers crossed. So we do those. I do an entrance ticket about the stats because that's the hard part, I think, for most English teachers. And these are all masters and TESOL students, no doctoral students. And I try to see how many of them were trying and got stuck on something. For those who didn't try, it's like, okay, sorry. But if they tried and got stuck, I do try to go over in class what that problem was. Typically, it's if they're actually putting in the effort, it's in bite-sized pieces, and most people can get it. Typically, I'll work with anyone who's having trouble. The big capstone thing for the course is not a project I designed. I've tweaked it a little. I love it. It is the small groups of 2 or 3 have to develop a 2 quote-unquote skill test for whatever purpose, placement, diagnosis, achievement, whatever. And they got to write the specs, and they've got to write the test, administer it to 25 people, score it, calculate the reliability and descriptives and all that, and talk about how well they've done in meeting the policies of usefulness. We don't do the full AUA thing. I think it's a little too elaborate for that level. And that's that. That's where they start to understand reliability if they don't count on their friend to do all the stats. If they do, then that comes back to bite them when they're preparing for the comprehensive exam. I see a former student who's smiling. It hasn't changed in 10 years, has it? Well, it was that way 10 years ago. It's still that way now.
Well, and I think that one of the things, like, I love the project. One of the things I'll have people do is predict what they, before the test is administered, predict which they think their best item is, and then they can see, is it actually the best item? Which one do you think is going to function well? Which ones do you have questions on? And sort of do a prediction of them. And then say, now use your statistics to see, does that confirm? And what will happen is that then you'll see, oh, well, wait a second. It didn't quite function the way that I had intended. Dan, do you want to tell us about your syllabus?
Sure. I'll say a few things. So if you want to open the one that says 611, so that's for the graduate course, the version I made. We used to have a combined course that served undergraduate, upper division and graduate students, but decided to break it apart. And I guess what I'll highlight here is, and maybe this relates to some of the ideas you brought up, Troy, but trying to come up with ways for different kinds of students to get the most out of the course, kind of appropriate to their level. So, like Nathan, I use a test development project or piloting project where they collect data, run some stats as one option, but I also have something for people with a little more experience, so maybe PhD students, maybe they had an assessment course, several years ago, but they want to take it with me to do something else, so they can focus on more of an in-depth systematic review in lieu of developing a test if they have that experience under their belt already. And then sometimes I'll get more advanced PhD students, or including from other departments, who they know that they need to develop an instrument for a more substantial project, like a dissertation or a qualifying paper. And so they might be, they might have the instrument developed already, and they want to do more of a validation research project. So I try to create space for that. I guess textbook-wise, since that's what's on the screen here, for the graduate course I'm using, sorry, I have the year wrong here, Carol's new book, trying to, I wanted to be able to push graduate students further to get them thinking a little more deeper about validity issues in this course. So motivating research and motivating, understanding the motivation for why we evaluate tests in the way we do. So yeah, if there's any other.
Let's see, do we have any others? I think, Rory, did I say that you had one that?
Yeah, there's one there.
Okay. Oh, I think I need to click here, okay. You want to tell us about yours?
Sure. So the class I teach is primarily undergraduate students. So there's a mix of undergraduate education majors, language majors, and then a few master's and TESOL students taking it. I try to make it practical, but we also introduce concepts of test quality and reliability, validity, fairness. I feel like I'd be spoiled for choice with textbooks if I was teaching just graduate students, but there just aren't many assessment literacy focused textbooks that are good for both undergraduates and graduates. So I use the Arthur Hughes book. It's nice, but it really front loads a lot of the heady theoretical stuff, and I think that's not great for undergraduates. That's a challenge we have, like walking through reliability, validity, and then it's after the midterm when we finally get to the thing that undergraduates think testing is, which is crafting items and learning to rate an essay and stuff like that. There are slightly different rubrics for the undergraduate and graduate. They all have to participate in discussions in class. They all have to write a test review. It can be a local test or an established standardized test. There are slightly different recommendations for how they go about that, especially because I want them to talk about reliability and that information is not always publicly available. There are midterms, and there's a midterm, and then the big final project is a test development project that starts with specifications, item writing, and then piloting it with the rest of the students in the class. And with all of these grading objectives, there is sort of a debrief period where we talk about like, what was the purpose of the test review? Do you think that was a fair assessment of your ability that you learned in this class? You look at the midterm, do you think these items were fair? Do you think they were valid? With the test development, I asked them to take that pilot data and the feedback from their classmates and work that into their report on the test development. So we're always kind of taking apart the grades that I assign them, as well as learning test best practices.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll wrap up. I just want to share. So, one of the things that I've also done is that my final exam for every class, that I have them do a self-reflection, a 30-minute essay. I tell them this at the beginning. Evaluate your learning over the course of the semester. What did you try to do to learn the material? When and where did you do your independent work? Did you create or join any study groups? How was your attendance, timely homework completion? What grade would you give yourself on effort? What did you learn from the class that you did not know before? What evidence do you have to support this? Mastery of the learning objectives. How well can you apply the principles you've learned to real-world situations? Please refer to the can-do statements provided at the start of the semester. What areas are you confident in your ability to do? What, if any, evidence do you have to support this? What grade would you give yourself on mastery? Evaluating the past. If you had to give yourself a grade for this class, what would it be and why? Looking towards the future as a lifelong learner. How do you intend to use what you've learned in class to become a lifelong learner? And it's really been nice to just sort of read some of this. And I think, maybe Nathan, I can't remember, one of the things, I've had students come back and they're like, Dr. Cox, I hated all the Excel assignments. I use Excel all the time in the real world now. And you were the one that made me do it. And so I do think there is something to say that if we want to give our students, make them prepared for the real world, having them have numeracy this is one of the very few classes in a language curriculum where we can do that and tie it together. So it is a little bit of a growing pain, and they are going to crash headfirst down a thing, and they're going to like going down a hill, and they're going, why isn't this formula working? And then it's like, oh, it's because I didn't make it, it's a relative instead of an absolute reference, and that's what's going on. But the only way you learn that is by screwing up. And that's why I'm going to do my signature headstand, because we have a camera. That's why I practice yoga. Because if you're not falling, the only way you get to that, I'm working on handstand now. The only way to get to consistency is to fall a lot and to get it so that you start recognizing stuff. So I think we need to let our students know that it's okay to fail. And one of the great things that I can do is that I'm able to tell my students that when I went for my dissertation prospectus defense, they had to table and reconvene because I was that bad. And I still did okay. Because we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. So thank you very much. Enjoy your break. Nathan, we're going to start back at 4, right? Okay. Enjoy your break.